All right, notes on factoring. This is section 4.4 in your book. We've skipped section 4.3. We'll look at it tomorrow. Have a test on Thursday. Factoring. All right, the first step in every single factoring problem, always factor out the GCF. What does GCF stand for? Greatest common factor. And here's a little note for you. If the first term in an expression is negative, factor out a negative with the GCF. Now we know negative numbers are always going to be smaller than positive numbers, and so our greatest common factor would never be negative. But if the first term in an expression is negative, you're going to factor out a negative along with your GCF. So we're going to do a few examples so you can see what I mean by that. Remember, GCF is greatest common factor. All right, so here are the 3 examples that we're going to do of factoring out the GCF. On example A, what is the greatest common factor of 4 and 28? 4. And then because we have x squared and x, we will also factor out their GCF, which is x. So you write the GCF on the outside of parentheses. Now there are 2 ways of looking at this. You can say 4x squared divided by 4x is x, and negative 28x divided by 4x is negative 7. Another way of looking at it is, what do I need to multiply 4x by to get 4x squared? X. What do I need to multiply 4x by to get negative 28x? Negative 7. Whatever you do, when you finish, your factors should multiply to give you your original problem. So that's a way to check. Also, you shouldn't be able to factor any part of your answer. If you can factor any part of your answer, you should be able, you should continue to factor it. The only exception is constants. You don't have to break the constants down, okay? You don't have to break 4 down into 2 times 2. All right, looking over here at B. First off, I notice that I have a negative as a leading term. So when your leading term in the expression is negative, you're going to factor out a negative with that GCF. What's the GCF of the constants, 7 and 21? 7. What's the GCF of n squared and n? N. We go with the smallest exponent. For greatest common factor, it's what they have in common. So you have to go with the least number. Okay, the least exponent, because that's what they'll have in common. And then P and P. Just P. Open up your parentheses once you have your GCF on the outside. What do I need to multiply negative 7np by to get negative 7n squared? P. N. Another way of looking at that is dividing this by the GCF. Okay. What do I need to multiply negative 7np by to get positive 21np? Negative 3. Another way of looking at is dividing by the GCF. Which one do y'all like better? Do y'all like dividing by the GCF, or do you like saying, what do I need to multiply by? Okay, you're split. It doesn't matter to me. All right, you try the last one. I hope that you found the GCF to be 5y squared. Okay, when you have variables, remember we go with the smallest exponent because this one has 3, this one has 2. So how many could they have in common. They could only have 2 in common since this one only has 2. Like if we did y to the third is 3y's and y squared is 2y's, how many would they have in common? 2. All right, so our GCF is 5y squared. We take out 5y squared and we're left with y minus 4. Any questions on GCF? Yes. It sure would be 3y.
Well, I got another question.
Thank you.
Is this? I remember this from last year. Is this like newer stuff, or is this still review?
Still review. It's going to lead to some newer stuff. We have to review before we can do the new stuff.
I'm going to be gone the whole time you're doing all the new stuff.
So sorry. All right. Here is where I want to go with new stuff. Well, you might already know this though. Factoring 4 terms. If you are factoring and there are 4 terms, here is a method that you should try. It's called grouping. Okay, and the best way to teach you is with an example. Now on your test, all of these are going to say factor. Every single one is going to say factor. You're going to have to decide how to factor. So that's what we're going to practice tomorrow, is I just give you a whole bunch of mixed up problems and you have to remember how to factor them. Here's our first one. Okay. And here's what we do with grouping. When you have 4 terms, you put them into 2 groups so that each group has a GCF. Now, please understand that does not mean this times this, okay? If it makes you feel better, you can put a plus sign in between there. Minus 18 is the same thing as plus negative 18, okay? I don't want y'all to think we're multiplying these 2 groups together. I'm just saying I'm going to look at this set, and then I'm going to look at this set. So this one has a GCF, this set has a GCF. So we just put it into 2 groups. I'm just going to write group. The next thing you do is take out the GCF of each group. What's the GCF of this group? 5A. Okay, your GCF would be 5A. And when you take out 5A, you're left with 3A minus B. And then we're going to do that on the second set. What's the GCF of the second set? 6C, but because our leading term in this group is negative, we're going to factor out a negative 6C. And look what that leaves you with. 3A minus B. And that was factor out the GCF of each group. So, we set them up into 2 groups so that each group had a GCF. We factored out the GCF of each group, and look what we found. A new GCF. Okay? What do these 2 terms have in common? 3A minus B. And when you factor out the 3A minus B here, what are you left with? 5A. And when you factor out the 3A minus B here, what are you left with? Minus 6C, and that's your answer. If you're writing instructions, factor out the new GCF. And that's your answer. Any questions on factoring by grouping? Do y'all remember doing this in 8th grade or 9th grade whenever you took Algebra 1? Show of hands if you remember doing it. Okay. and then about a third if you don't. That's okay. All right, so we're going to pause. So now that we practice our factor pairs, we are going to look at how to factor when a is not 1. If we have ax squared plus bx plus c. Yes. Okay, so we looked at something like this, and you don't have to write this down, but where we said it's going to end up multiplying to this, so it'll have a product to this number, and then it'll add to this number, because we're basically undoing FOIL. So negative 6 and positive 1 are the factors of negative 6 that add to negative 5. And that would be the factorization. So, what do we do, though, when the coefficient of x squared is not 1? So, factoring ax squared plus bx plus c when a is not 1. Now, again, what's the first thing we're always going to do? It's in your notes. GCF. If there is a GCF, you're going to factor out that greatest common factor. But if there's not, we're going to do something called tic-tac-toe. How many of you are familiar with tic-tac-toe?
I remember, but I don't remember how to do it.
Oh. Only one person?
Remember this hollow thing?
Just familiar with it. How many of you are familiar with slip and slide?
I think that's the one we did.
Oh. Oh, no. We have time to write it down. So now we're going to look at factoring a quadratic when the coefficient of x squared is not 1. So ax squared plus bx plus c when a is not 1. As a class, we decided that we are going to do it the textbook method of grouping. You may have done tic-tac-toe before, you may have done slip and slide before, and you're still welcome to do those. However, as a class, and we do them in class, we're going to do them by grouping. Tic-tac-toe and slip and slide are just different ways of grouping. They're all grouping. When I look at this, I say, is there a GCF for 2, 7, and 9? No, there's not. So I may proceed. To do grouping, we multiply the first times the last and get negative 18. We say what factors of negative 18 have a sum of the middle number. So that's going to be 1 and 18, 2 and 9, or 3 and 6. But because it's negative, 1 in each pair has to be negative. And the largest one is going to be positive since we want it to add to be a positive. Now, do you have to make that list if you already know the factors? No, I'm just modeling how to find the factors in case you can't do it in your head. Okay, list them all out. So once we have these factors, we keep the first term, we keep the last term, but we rewrite the middle term with these factors. So we rewrite the middle term with these factors. Since it's 7x, I have to put an x with both of them. Since we want them to add up to 7x, I put an x with both of them. And then we do grouping. Okay? So rewrite middle term with our factors. And then our last step is to group. These already have a common factor. Those already have a common factor, so I just keep them in the order that they're in. Usually you're going to be able to just keep them in the order that they're already in. And then we take out the GCF of this group, which is 2x, and that leaves me with x minus 1. What's the GCF of the second group? 9. And that's going to leave me with x minus 1. So my new GCF is x minus 1. And when I take out an x minus 1, I'm left with 2x plus 9. How could I check my work to make sure that I got it right? I could FOIL. Okay, distribute it back out, first, outer, inner, last, and see if I get the same thing that I started with. So, first step, you're going to multiply first times last. Then you're going to find the factors of that product that have a sum of the middle. You're going to rewrite the middle using those factors and then group. All right, let's do another example. Does anybody have questions on this one, though, before we do? Okay, do one more example, and then I'm going to let you do one. So 3x squared minus 16x plus 5. 3x squared minus 16x plus 5. So the first step, I'm going to multiply 3 times 5 and get a positive 15. I want factors of that add to what? Negative 16. So look, when I do my first factor pair, 1 and 15, I see that I can get 16. If I make them both negative, then I get negative 16, and they still multiply to a positive. So take these numbers, that first times last, and then you want the numbers that add to the middle and multiply to that. Rewrite it. Minus 1x minus 15x. So you just rewrite it. All right, then I'm going to group. Here, remember, minus 15x is the same as plus negative 15x. What do I do after I put them in groups? Greatest common factor of each group. Here, it's just going to be an x and leave me with 3x minus 1. What will we use for our GCF in the second group? 5, and because the leading term is negative, we'll factor out a negative with that. And we'll get 3x minus 1. And then finally, take out the new GCF, and you're left with x minus 5. How can I check my answer? Can FOIL. I can distribute it again. All right, this is the one for you to do. Okay, so the answer to that one was 2x plus 3 times x plus 4. And this is your homework, page 221, 7 through 10, 62, 63, and 67.